Welcome.
Where we talk about everything about the art and craft of acting. And this is our deep dive into Raymond J. Barry, the great character actor.
Yes.
Let's just dive right into it, Tommy.
Sounds good.
The value of athletic discipline.
Yeah, and the value of discipline, just period. But one of the big things that Ray was talking about was it seemed, and it wasn't bragging, it was just a fact. I mean, it seemed like he was a superior athlete as a young kid. He was chosen very early on to do multiple sports, particularly football. The coach urged him to pursue a scholarship because he was like, I think he saw a lot of talent and saw that Ray needed to get out of his family situation as soon as possible. And he was like, you could get a scholarship. And he did. He got one to Brown University and played football at Brown. And it was just interesting to hear him talk about athletics. We were just talking about how you can see acting through another artistic lens and it can inform. I think athletics is actually, a lot of people think that artistic endeavors and athletics are completely separate. You know, there's a group of kids that do art and then there's a group of kids that do athletics and sports, and never the twain shall meet. I think that's a big mistake. I think there is so much, and Ray Gray was talking about this in a big way, but I think there's a lot of commonalities between sports and the craft of acting particularly. I mean, we can run down the list of them, but I do think it's really, really important. I mean, teamwork, collaboration, repetition, practice, doing drills, the value of repetition. You know, obviously we call it rehearsal, to rehear something, you know, but I think that is so important to athletics. It's the foundation of athletics, practice, right? And I think the same thing applies to acting. And I think for Ray, he started working out, I believe, with weights when he was 13. So he became this kind of Adonis figure, huge muscles, and very, very, he said he was also very fast. And I just think it was an interesting thing that he was talking about how athletics for him was a window into discipline, into hard work, into his work ethic that I think he's kept his entire life. And clearly his work in acting, I think, has been informed by the practice and the repetition and the hard work and the work ethic that he started as an athlete. And it just got me thinking about the word discipline. I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah, what is it?
So, I mean, the etymology of the word, the origin of the word is from Latin. And so the disciple actually means learner. That's the origin of the word disciple. Of course, disciple is a major root of discipline, right? But then the definition of discipline is really interesting. An activity, exercise, or regimen that develops or improves a skill. Training, right? I mean, could that not also apply to acting? I think it can, right? So I think a big part of acting training, I think, is drilling, repetition, rehearsal, going over something again and again and again, right? It's the foundation of theater work. It's the foundation of most prep work that you do as an actor, whether it's film or television or anything. Clearly, you're shooting, when you're on set, you know, on film and television, you're shooting a scene multiple times, right? From different angles, normally. So that is also part of the repetition of doing, right? And I think that's a key part of acting. And I think it has a lot of strings in common with athletics. And I just think it was really interesting that Ray clearly came from an athletic background, and he applied all of those skill sets and all of the things he's learned. The way he works, it seems, has come directly from his training as an athlete.
Yeah, I think one of the things that sometimes acting and Hollywood kind of perpetuates is this idea about the natural actor that's never trained. It just comes naturally. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of actors take that and they think that if they don't just have it right away, they don't have what it takes, or they think performances are very in the moment and just happen, and you need that intuition. So I really shouldn't work hard. And it's really just the opposite. I know that's a big thing we keep on repeating and repeating. But one time I had to sign an NDA. I was working with a particular person. Just say that very generally because they did not want it to get out that this person was studying. I'm like, why? Why? They wanted to do this narrative that this person was a natural that has just picked it up. And that's just such BS. The people that I work with who I think do great work, that work all the time, are the most disciplined.
Yes. Yes.
And it's really like acting we think is some magical thing. And we are looking for the lightning in the bottle, those takes in the moment that have the magic, okay? I'm not denying that. But it's really just boring, hard work.
It doesn't take magic to get to the magic. It takes hard fucking work
Yeah.
to get to the magic, right? I think is one of the things. But it is interesting. I mean, we've talked about this a little bit before, and obviously, you know, we are teachers and coaches, so it's not really about barking up our own tree. But I do think it is interesting, again, to make an analogy to athletics. You have athletes now that are playing at the highest levels of their sports, right? They have strength and conditioning coaches. They have batting coaches. They have throwing coaches. They have catching coaches. They have, when you're playing basketball, they have shooting coaches. They have dribbling coaches. They have all these people that help you to develop and hone and perfect your craft. Why is it that in acting it's considered such a no-no? It's such a vile thing to admit that you are working with a coach or a teacher. I think it's such a disservice to the art of acting. And again, I think, like you said, it makes the civilian, the normal viewer, think that anybody can do it and that it's super easy and that it should come naturally. And then if it doesn't come naturally, that you shouldn't be doing it. And one of the things that Ray said in his interview that I thought was a really interesting, consistent theme was he would start to talk about the beginning of his career and he would say, and I wasn't very good. And then he would talk about another project or another group that he was working with. And he said, and I wasn't very good, you know? And Raymond, certainly, when you start talking to him, you realize he is a no bullshit kind of guy. This is a guy that does not lie. And so to me, what that said is this is a person who was attracted to acting and driven by the fact that he wasn't good. He wanted to get better. It was a craft that was eluding him. And he saw people that did it at a very high level. And he's like, I want to do it like that. And so instead of being turned off because it wasn't easy or if it didn't come natural to him, it inspired him to work even harder. And I think there are so many people, hopefully, that are listening to this podcast that, you know, even if you're not acting already, you dream of acting. And the one thing we can say is even if it comes hard to you, keep doing it. Don't stop because it's hard. Like, it's the best reason to keep going, right? If you have a passion for it, a desire for it, just because it doesn't come naturally, easily, perfectly out of your mouth the first time does not mean that you will not make one day a really, truly, superiorly talented and wonderful actor. So I think it's just something that, and I think it's a societal, cultural thing, I think now too, you know, that we're supposed to, like you were saying, almost like sprung out of the womb, you know, as a genius, you know, and I don't think it really, again, for most mortals, it doesn't really work that way. And there's a lot of great actors that have taken a long time to get to where they are. And, you know, again, cliche, but there is no such thing as an overnight success. If you start digging in deep enough, you know, I think the press makes you think that people come out of nowhere and all of a sudden get cast in this thing and they're superstars. You start digging enough and you will realize that is absolutely not the case. Everybody starts from somewhere. A very famous, before the other famous golfers like Tiger Woods that people know, the original kind of famous superstar golfer was a guy named Ben Hogan. And Ben Hogan used to say, people would say, oh my God, that was the luckiest shot that you've ever made, you know. And he used to say, funny thing about luck. He said, I find the harder I work, the luckier I get. is what he said.
Wow.
And I always thought that was really valuable. One last thing about discipline that
Yeah.
I think is interesting. I don't know who coined it, but it's somebody out there that said it. And I'm sorry that I think it's like one of those things that a lot of people have said. But if you, and it's not true etymology, but if you break up the word discipline, what you can really get is a disciple of the plan. And I always loved that idea that you are a learner, a disciple of the plan. Like make a plan, stick to it. That ultimately is the core and the foundation of what discipline is, right? And as we know, one of the famous quotes of Stanislavski, I think he starts out, an actor prepares. I believe one of the first words or phrases he uses is an actor must have an iron discipline, is one of the things he says.
Wow.
Yeah. So from the mouth of the origin of a lot of this stuff that we talk about.
And Raymond J. Barry literally willed himself to be a good actor.
Talk about an iron discipline.
Willed himself. He
Yeah.
said, I was shitty, and I worked and worked and worked. I remember I used to help him with lines back in the day, and we would just do it. He had to do it 10 times in a row perfect, or else we'd start from the beginning.
We'll talk about that in a second because of overcoming
Yeah.
fear. It's a big part of his. But he does say, even when he was talking about athletics, he said, "You might be better at me than me. You might be smarter than me. You might be more talented." But he said, "I will outwork you." And I just thought, what a beautiful thing to say. What a great work ethic to have. You know.
The importance of listening and observation.
Yeah. For sure. Ray. Without getting into too much detail, we'll leave it for the actual listening of the podcast and his whole interview. But he had a rough upbringing, had a really, really tough childhood, and a lot of traumatic stuff happened to him and his mother particularly. I think it really traumatized him in a lot of ways and defined and informed his life in a lot of ways. But one of the manifestations of the trauma of his early life is when he was about 13, I believe, he decided that he was going to stop talking. And so for many, many years, he did not really talk. He said he would answer yes or no to a question that he would ask, but ultimately he would not really speak on any significant level at all.
I remember him telling me that when he first got to Brown, when people used to ask him how he's doing, he used to always say the same thing, and it was, as best as can be expected.
Wow.
That's all he said.
Wow.
Hey, Ray, how you doing? As best as can be expected.
Wow.
That's it.
That says it all right there, you know. But I think one thing that I loved about what Ray was saying is that, you know, we would, I think by nature, we'd think that as an awful thing, as a negative. But I think he started seeing it as a positive, and he looked on the other side of that. And he said he learned how to listen. And I thought that was really beautiful. He said he also learned how to observe, and he became more of an observer. And I think those two things, those two skills, those two qualities are also highly, highly underrated in terms of skill sets that are important for an actor. I think in class, a lot of times,
We're always talking about this. You always mention it.
and look, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but at least it won't sound like a broken record here. But I do think when you are learning how to act, and understandably, the words that are coming out of your mouth are very important. I completely get it. But I think a lot of our focus is on the delivery of those words, how we're going to say those words, what little stress we're going to put on, what emphasis, how we're going to get meaning out of the words that we're saying and apply it to the moment at hand. And that's all important stuff to do. It truly is. Again, we're not the biggest fans of totally planning that out and mapping that out. We like a little spontaneity, but I still think it's important to consider those things. But I think far more important is what you are receiving, what you are taking in from what the other person is saying or doing. And we say it in class all the time that when you really break it down, everything that you say and do is a reaction or a response to what somebody else is saying or doing. And again, cliche to say acting is reacting, but it's a cliche for a reason. because it's true. Everything is a reaction. And I think we try to focus in class more on the reaction, more on what the reaction causes you to do, what you say, the pinch for the ouch, right? We're always looking to find that pinch that creates the ouch. That's a big part of what we focus on in acting and what we focus on in the scene work that we do in class. And I think people are starting to get it a little bit more, fingers crossed, but I think it's a hard muscle to try to work out because it goes against the grain of what you think acting really is. But acting, to me and to us, I don't believe it is about the delivery, it is about, or the transmission, it is about the receiving, the reception. That is where the beauty of acting is to really be open to be affected by what somebody else is saying or doing, and let that inform what you say or do. And I think listening is a foundation of that. Observation is a foundation of that. I remember, I think it was, I want to say John Gielgud, but one of the famous actors of the day, is particularly in England. They were saying what was the biggest downside to fame and celebrity for them. Excuse me, I know exactly who it was, because it was Alec Guinness, and it was after he became famously Obi-Wan Kenobi, and obviously became a world superstar. He said the thing that he missed the most, that he regretted the most, that affected his life and his craft of acting the most, was his inability to be quiet and invisible and observe people. He said that ability completely went away because everywhere he went, everybody saw him and knew him as Obi-Wan Kenobi. So he didn't have the ability to quietly sit in a corner and watch. And I think that's such a valuable skill as an actor, to observe life. Yes, as you say all the time in class, an actor is a paid professional experiencer. But I think part of what informs your ability to experience something is the observation of experience, the observation of life, right? And I think when you're denied that, when you don't pursue that, I think it cuts you off as an actor. It cuts off your ability to experience the human condition.
Yeah, I think just in acting, I mean, yes, listening is so important, but I think the experience for Ray is we're so worried about, like, I call it like the song and dance of acting. Like, we're always entertaining and we always have to feel like we have to push and fill the space instead of just taking in to understand subtext of what someone's saying underneath the line and what's underneath that line. The ability to take that in, I think, really makes for interesting performance. I think if we're so like pushing it out, sometimes it becomes too much and we're not able to like sit and watch and observe. And a lot of time our moments are very internal and we don't allow that. We're like this loud clanging noise that we can't get into the character if you're not really listening and observing on a deep level.
I agree. I completely. And also the ability to be affected, to allow yourself to be open enough to be affected by what is happening in the scene and what somebody is giving to you. And also a big part of an interview, particularly with Brennan Elliott, was inclusion. We've been talking about that a lot in class. Including in your work what has just happened, a moment, an accident, something that is unpredictable, that's given to you in a way that you've never heard it before. To include that. If you're working on a scene and a weird sound happens, to include that in the scene, not deny it. You're closing off life, right? To include what's happening around you in the scene is such a beautiful thing to do. It's such a real and truthful thing to do. And I think on the other end of that, it gives you magic, right? But I think you have to be able to be open and listen and observe in order to include, right?
Yeah, well, there's the famous story of the actor who had his Broadway debut. And his line was, "Methinks I hear a cannon," right? And so he's on the train into the city, and he's going over the line. "Methinks I hear a cannon. Methinks I hear a cannon. Methinks I hear a cannon." And he's just got it all planned out, and he's like, oh, and he's ready on stage, and he's backstage, and he's ready to enter, and he's like, "Methinks I hear a cannon. Methinks I hear a cannon." I got it. He's done all his exercises, and he's ready to perform. And he goes out on stage, and all of a sudden, boom! And he goes, "What the fuck was that?" "Oh, methinks I hear a cannon." You know, it's like this planning, this is what I'm putting out there instead of taking it in and responding. I know it's so freaking obvious what we're saying, but just in life too, I think it's a life thing.
Yeah.
About really listening and hearing people and observing people. We've talked about the power of observation with our imagination and helping us create characters. Goes without saying. I think we've said it before, but super valuable.
I do think it's interesting that my mom always used to say this. Are you the kind of person that's truly listening to what somebody is saying while they're talking and while you're having a conversation? Or are you the kind of person that's listening to them, but you're thinking about what you're going to say while you're listening in the conversation? And I think when you translate that to acting, there is nothing more boring than to see an actor pretending to listen, and you can tell in their mind they're ramping up and gearing up for the line that they are going to give. Like, blah, 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 blah. Okay, my line's coming, my line's coming, my line's coming, right? I think it's so important to actually genuinely listen. But then we've seen it a lot too. It's the hardest thing, particularly like when somebody has in a scene, when your scene partner has this long speech. I think it's another one of the most challenging things as an actor, to really engage and to really be, you've already heard the words, you know them, you know what's happening, you know what the events that they're describing, you've heard them tons of times in rehearsal and repetition, right? But to really hear them and listen to them as if it's the first time you're hearing them, and to truly listen instead of to do the,
Actor listening.
You know, I just think to acting like you're listening is not listening, right? And I think we get into bad habits certainly in that realm. But I think if you can open yourself and avail yourself to actually, truly, genuinely listening and trying to get in the moment where you're hearing something for the first time, what magic you can find on the other end.
Totally. And just to speak on a real, like, actionable thing is listening to a monologue. Okay, that's sometimes more difficult than doing the monologue.
Yeah,
I've seen a lot of actors, you know, they have a little chunk of monologue that they're listening to. They're just blank. And then the line comes. You have to be thinking during it. And I've had one acting teacher say it's the triangle. When you're listening, there's 3 different things that are happening. The first part is usually, what the fuck are you talking about? So there's a look in your eyes, like, and halfway through you're like, oh, I think I get what you're saying, to the impulse for your line. Now, that's a vast generalization. Not every listening to every monologue is like that, but surprisingly enough in the class,
it's a good pattern and a foundation to start. That's right.
That pattern was a lot there.
That's right.
But the point is that you have to do very specific listening. Number one, so you can arrive at a story. Your storytelling. You're processing what someone's saying in a monologue. And number 2, so they have something to cut to. If you're blanker than blank, there's nothing to cut to except this blank expression, but you need to see little changes.
That's right.
Because it's all about seeing changes on screen. And so those are just really important things to happen, specifically when listening to a monologue that's being given to you.
When we've been doing monologues in class, it's interesting because we focus a lot on the impetus for why you say what you say, why you start speaking as long as you do, like what causes the speaker of a monologue to speak. But what you're describing, which I think is really important, is in terms of the listener of a monologue, what is in the monologue that triggers what you say next? What about that monologue, what event or what word or what phrase or what moment creates the opportunity for you to say what you're going to say after someone's big speech, I think is a very important thing.
Yeah, and it doesn't come right on the last line.
No.
That's the point of the triangle. It's
almost
like in
always,
threes.
almost
Everything
always
happens
right?
in threes,
That's
right? So he was describing a process of you processing till you get to the point of, by the time you get to your line and your impulse, you have gone through 2 other things, 3 things total of thought processes to arrive at that.
It's really great. Again, great template, right? I mean,
Yeah. It's a great template to look at as an actor in a scene that you're working on.
That's right.
So the value of listening and observing.
Highly recommended.
I highly recommend it. Try it. You'll
Try
like
it. You'll like it.
Overcoming fear.
Ooh, yeah.
This was a really heavy-duty theme that we
was.
talked about in the podcast. Please listen. We're not going to do it justice, but we want to talk about, first of all, I will say this, Tommy. I say this a lot. Acting is 99%. No, I'm going to rewind. Acting is a mental game. Acting is such a mental game. How can we be so great at home? I hear this all the time. Man, at home, I was crying. I was brilliant. I was weeping. And then we run the camera, and I'm here. And it's just me, with some lights and a camera, and they're dry up. It's just how fear really messes with performance.
Yeah, it does. It does.
I speak to Ray's without getting into a lot of details.
Yeah, just thumbnail. I mean, again, he goes into much more detail in the actual interview, but he had a terrible experience. His first kind of significant performance that he had at a well-known group at the time called the McCarter Theater. He was just starting out as an actor. He was given some nice lines and a nice part, and he went up on his lines in the middle of a performance, and it essentially led to a nervous breakdown.
He essentially left the stage.
He did.
He didn't sometimes you might forget it and you're on stage. You got to deal with it. Another actor will pull you out of it.
That's very true.
Sometimes a stage director will feed you a line.
That's right.
And we take a little rough start, but you got to go.
Alex Koch was talking about this, that he forgot his lines, and then he was trying to find a way with the other actors to circle back and get back on track, and because it was this big speech that he dropped and stuff like that. I mean, that happens all the time. Of course, we always talk about how real those moments are and how amazing it can be on the other side of forgetting your lines, how real the moments can be. So it ironic, it can be a gift. But in Ray's case, he absolutely crumbled and left, and the actors on stage were forced to include that in the storytelling, what was going on with him. And then he locked himself in the dressing room, and they couldn't get to him, and there was a pretty rough moment that happened after that. But again, leave it for the interview. But I think the what really came from that was he had such a paralyzing fear of forgetting his lines ever again. He was so traumatized by that experience that he vowed to himself that would never, ever, ever happen to him again. So on the flip side of that, he became a line learning machine, which is interesting because when he was an athlete, that was his nickname as well, was the Machine. I guess, again, his workout regimen. So his friends would nickname him the Machine. But then, of course, that machine mentality, that hard work ethic came into learning his lines. And I don't think he ever went up on his lines ever again. I mean, I think it was such an ingrained part of what he was doing, that repetition, that absolutely knowing them backwards and forwards, inside and out. I think that just became a part of his process and informed the rest of the way he worked as an actor. And I think that was one of his ways to overcome that fear. Was to just channel all his work ethic into learning his lines, first and foremost, above and beyond any other kind of prep work or technique stuff he applied. And I thought that was really, really interesting to me. And then he started to talk about how he felt like fear, again, another beautiful example about turning a negative into a positive, like his inability to talk as a kid helped him listen and observe. I think he started talking about how fear, in a weird way, became a friend of his, like to understand his fear, to accept it, to work with it and through it. to get on the other side of it, that it taught him so many lessons. I thought that was such an interesting part of the interview.
When he was talking about how you reframe stuff, and we've talked about that before, you fear because you care.
That was a big part.
That's the reframing of nervousness and fear.
That's lovely, right? And he mentioned that too, that caring, that was a big part of what he was talking about, that it's you care. And it's so interesting. Again, I think there's pressure in our culture, in our society. There's such a fear of failure and of fucking up. That becomes the primary obstacle, right? And I think if you can relieve yourself of that, what you can get on the other side of that is really, really special, right? I think Laurence Olivier talked about the difference between failure and brilliance was just a razor's edge. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. To be able to risk something, yes, risk failure, but what a reward that you can get on the other side of that, I think is really huge.
And what I found fascinating, from that experience of going up on his lines at the McCarter stage and the devastating effect it had upon him, he could have just ended it right there, literally and figuratively, his career. But he stuck in it and he kept putting his hand in the fire, he talked about. And that's how we overcome that as an actor. If you have a certain problem in your acting, is to attack it straight on and put your hand in the fire with, in that particular case, fear. And one of the ways he did it was writing plays that were extremely wordy, extremely poetic, wow, extremely disciplined when it came to the words and the specificity of them. Mm. He went just the opposite. Wow. You'd think he'd make these plays that were, because he's a physical specimen and works very well physically, that had, bare bones.
Like Hemingway or something.
Yes.
No words.
This was excessive words. Wow.
Wow.
And we rehearsed, I did some plays with him. We would rehearse for 2 hours a day, every day. That was just the deal. 2 hours of line work, and it was that line work that I was talking about, as like, if you made one screw up, nope, got to go back. As soon as you make a screw up, go back to the top again and again and again and again and again. That was just the way he worked. Okay. And what I love about this podcast, what I love about doing this, is hearing all of people's different experiences.
Right.
And we're just kind of talking about it, kicking it around, throwing out there, because I find each one utterly fascinating.
Right. And that particular process worked for him, right? To start, as soon as he fucked up, to not accept the fuck up and move on, to stop, go back to the beginning and keep work. And I think there's a value in that, just generally, whether that works for you in your process or not, but to confront, it goes back to what you were saying. I mean, if you do have a block or a fear, to confront that, to continue to attack that fear, that obstacle, that problem, that issue, until you start to get around it and start to move through it and start to accept it. He was talking about how dangerous it is to deny your fear, and it's so true. I mean, if accepting it and allowing that as the reality, I think, is so important. Even saying, let alone if you say it out loud in an audition, but accepting the fact that you're scared as shit and you're nervous. I think there's a freedom to that. I think it's incredibly charming. I've as a reader, a lot of times in auditions, it's amazing. You have people and they're trying to do small talk, and then they go, woo, and they go, I'm really fucking nervous. And it lessens the tension in the room. There's something kind of really charming about it. And it's allowing people into your state in a good way, in an inviting way, not in an off-putting way. But it's like, yeah, you're accepting the reality of the situation, that this audition is a nerve-wracking process, and to admit it sometimes is a beautiful thing, to allow it instead of denying it. Because I think when you deny it, when you hide it, you're shutting down. You're putting up blocks already to creativity, to confidence, to reality, to allowing and accepting and including the stuff that we're talking about. I think there's a shutting down and a closing off that is antithetical to creativity and to acting, I think, itself, when you are in denial of your fear. We've also talked about it just on a pure performance level. I think fear and nervousness is a form of energy. And I think any energy can be manipulated and can be channeled. And I think there is a beautiful way to take that nervous energy and find a way circumstantially and use your imagination and your experience to channel it and funnel it into the circumstances of the work itself. Easier said than done. Again, just sitting on my fat ass in a chair and saying this, but I do think it's very, very valuable to find a way to channel that energy instead of denying that energy. I think that's when you start getting in trouble. Oh, I'm not. There's a famous scene that you do for everybody that comes to class where the first thing they're, are you nervous, Alex? No, not nervous. They're in total denial about it.
Right.
And I think it's so interesting that we have so many actors that approach that scene and they're acting like they're nervous, even though in reality
they are
nervous.
Right.
They're nervous. They're performing for the class for the first time. Allow that. Like, let that be your circumstance. Yeah, I'm nervous as an actor in this class, performing for Tom Draper in his class for the first time. Allow it. Accept it. Don't have to act like you're nervous. Be nervous. Be what you are, right?
I will say, actors will, find out I work with a particular actor and they'll go, oh my gosh, they must be so confident, huh? They just come in there and they just feel like they have it. I'm like, no, believe it or not, a lot of actors, when they approach a new part, are nervous. They're like, I don't know if I could do this. And people are absolutely shocked to hear that. Shocked to hear that a person with a list of credits super long still gets nervous.
Let me bring the analogy of athletics back. There are athletes at the highest level of their sports. They vomit before games. They have incredible fear and nervousness. Some of the best in their fields, right? It is a natural part of that process and something to accept and allow. Ray talked about how, in his opinion, in his world, preparation helps prevent fear, helps to mitigate fear, helps to control it. And I think that's a big part too. I think sometimes we're so worried about things that we want to control that we have absolutely no control over. And we've said it before in class. We've said it before on this podcast. The only thing that you really, really can control is your work. And I think the key to that is in your preparation. And I think the more prepared you are, the less possibility that you have to let fear overcome you. The more you can focus on the task at hand and instead of letting those little demons start seeping in and whispering in your ear and spinning you out. I think if you can anchor yourself into the preparation that you've done so that you can anchor yourself in the world that you've created, it gives you less opportunity to look at and again, if you're in a producer's session and there's a guy in the suit in the back and he's on his phone, I think there is less opportunity for you to start getting spun out about that and go, what the fuck is that guy on his phone? He's not liking what I'm doing. He's bored, right? You start focusing on things that you shouldn't focus on. And I think preparation is the key to me, the window, the door that allows you to get into that place where fear is something that you can accept and hold on and use and move on, and it won't overtake you.
Right. So preparation, and then just to circle back on one thing you said about allowing and including. As a performer in the moment, we can't deny what we're feeling. Okay, I'm not saying we let it overwhelm you, because let's say the character is very confident and you're feeling very nervous, but you do, if you're going to move through it organically, you have to acknowledge and allow instead of deny.
Absolutely right.
I mean, it's called the being state.
I was just going to say, it goes back to Eric Morris, right? The being exercise. And technically, I mean, we've said this before in class, but I think you could define acting itself as just one big being exercise, 100%. Right? I think truly, to really give over to the fact of allowing everything that's happening, everything, everywhere, all at once, like that movie, right? I think it's the same thing, allowing everything, accepting everything, no denial, right? That's the foundation of improv, no denial, right?
Yes.
And that includes, usually that means no denial of what you're being given in improv, but I think it also means experientially, no denying the circumstances of everything around you.
Yeah,
right?
Talk about real acting.
Yeah.
The lessons of failure.
Yeah.
On the other side of Ray's ultra preparation because of the fear of losing his lines, was how he had to learn to not plan ahead too much. So on the other side of this is a certain stiffness that you might have because, oh man, I don't want to forget those lines, so I am going to just muscle it out. And that doesn't make for a very interesting performance.
No, I think it's interesting, the journey of an actor that we've seen actually over a few years of class. We've seen people in their and it's not this, it's not as a steady, stable pattern for everybody, a predictable pattern for everybody, but there sometimes is a familiar kind of journey that happens where I think you approach the craft of acting as a beginner and you are completely out of control in every way, shape, and form, right? And then I think what happens is an interesting kind of diving into exploring total control. Planning everything, every line reading, every moment, every expression, every reaction. I think, again, maybe in an effort maybe to mitigate your fear, to control your fear, you control every moment of your performance. I think, again, we talk about auditioning. It's that weird kind of happy balance, right? You have to plan and you have to kind of, it's more of a performance than a kind of in the pocket, see what happens kind of situation. A little bit clearly more than when you're on set, in film and television, you're working with another actor and a director. There's hopefully a bit more spontaneity that happens, right? And like everything, there's a balance. But I do think there's a huge, keen desire to pre-plan everything. And I think there's a danger to that, right? I think if it goes back to what we were saying earlier in this deep dive. I think if you pre-plan everything, you don't give yourself room to accept anything new, to accept anything different. You are so locked into what you are doing, you cannot have an openness and an availability to accept and absorb and include what you're being given in the moment. And I think, so it's interesting to me that on the other side of, and I've always said with the actors I work with, I think where you really need to control and where you can have freedom of total control is your preparation. I think then when you prepare with total control, then you can let it the fuck go. So when you're in performance with somebody, you are free and open. You've done your homework. You don't need to play your homework. You don't need to show everybody that you've done your homework. You've done the work that you've done to give you the foundation to play, to be in a scene, in the moment with somebody and see what happens and see where the scene takes you, which ideally in a perfect world, no such thing as a perfect world, but you don't know where it's going to go. Even though you know the lines, even though you know the scenes, you know the beats, ideally when you're playing with a character, you don't quite know where it's going to go. And that's where magic can happen. That's exciting, right? That's where spontaneity and truly, truly moment-to-moment work can happen as an actor. And I think that's the goal, yeah?
And he learned this lesson of failure from, well, many sources, but one thing that really hit him was the great acting teacher and actor William Hickey,
yeah.
who got famous for a movie called Prizzi's Honor.
That's right.
Kind of put him on the map.
I love that
He'd
movie.
always been in the game for a long time, but that really put him on the map. And he said, Ray, you're planning ahead too much. You're not in the moment. You have to learn to trip and fall. You got to bump into walls. You got to make mistakes.
See, I love that. Bumping into walls, making mistakes. We've talked about how valuable making mistakes are, the accidents that can happen, and how beautiful the reality and the truth that happens on the back end of an accident or a mistake is just so
if
lovely.
You're too locked in and you're too tight, like I can't screw up, you don't allow that. So, acting is, you just have these total opposite things happening all the time.
That's right.
It's a lot to hold in your being, all these seeming contradictions.
And I think, again, culturally, society, I think we're taught that we're driven for success and achievement. And then in a way, we're indoctrinated to learn from our successes and our achievements. When in reality, I think when you really start talking to people that have had success and achievements, what they will tell you is they have learned far more from their failures, from their lack of achievement, from their mistakes, than they have ever learned from their successes. And I think that's something that, again, if you reverse engineer, start your career and welcoming your mistakes, learning from your failures. I think that's key. And I think that can help open up a world of freedom on the other side. Because if you're truly not afraid to fail, then you're creating an opportunity for genius.
For genius, yeah.
You are.
Sometimes you need a great director.
Yeah, that's right. Ray had a bunch of great directors in his life, but he really focused on three. I think the first one was in the theater world. It was Joseph Chaikin. The second one was a great film director and writer named Michael Cimino. And the third one was another great director and writer, Oliver Stone. So
now, the first Joseph Chaikin started the Open Theater. This was like in the 60s and the early 70s in New York. It was what you consider avant-garde theater.
Yeah, I think it really defined American experimental avant-garde theater. It was really the cornerstone of the American approach to experimental theater.
And you know who came out of that? I mean, a lot of great actors.
Many.
Okay, but the great acting coach Roy London came out of the Open Theater, who went on to teach Brad Pitt, Ray Berry in L.A.,
right.
who this is where Chubbuck comes from.
Oh, okay.
Ivana Chubbuck's teacher was Roy London.
Oh, there you go.
That's where
Isn't
she
that beautiful?
comes from.
The family tree.
Yeah, yeah.
It's lovely.
And what we were talking about earlier in the episode, the great voice teacher Kristen Linklater was at the Open Theater
wow.
participated in it.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
He was involved in the very beginnings. It was interesting. He was talking about working with the McCarter Theater. He had another interesting example of him running away from something. So there was an exercise that this particular woman that was kind of running the McCarter that invited him to work with them. They were almost doing like a raw share, like everybody in the ensemble would give something really, really personal to them. And when it got to Ray, he couldn't handle it. He was overwhelmed with all the things that he was feeling and experiencing, and I think fear, but also the floodgates of thing that he wanted to talk about. I think almost overload, and he bolted from the room. And it was so interesting what happened. This particular woman, I'm going to forget her name. Her name is in the podcast clearly. She was a wonderful woman, had a big impact on him. Because when she first got invited to work with McCarter, he wasn't even acting at all. He was working on, he was actually carving logs. He was working on his artistic life. And she very politely left him a note by his door saying, "We would like you to come and work with us." And then she did the same thing when he bolted out of this exercise. She wrote a note saying, "We'd like you to come back. And also there was a gentleman in watching our rehearsals and our experience, and his name is Joseph Chaikin, and he would like to meet with you, and he wants to invite you to join his theater company." Now, to me, what a brilliant gift is that a director had the foresight, the insight to look at somebody that bailed and said, "I want that guy." Like, that takes a keen mind, a keen observational spirit to go, that's the actor I want to work with, not the one that stays and shares, the one that bolts, right? I mean, we've talked a lot about it in class before. People that seem to have blocks on anger or grief, people that seem shut down in class, that cannot express themselves. I think it's been proven time and time again. These are the people that have the most deep feelings, that have the biggest well of emotions. I think that's one of the reasons why it's so hard for them to actually express them, because of a fear of the floodgates being open, of the fear of the lack of control that might happen on the other side when they do let go, right? So to me, when I look at the potential for acting, it's not always the person that loves the spotlight, that's like, look at me, that's so facile with how they express their emotions. It's the person that is shut down. It's the person that's in the corner, that's quiet. Those are the people that I look at, because I'm like, ooh, that's the person that has that depth of feeling that you need. Yeah. But I do think it was, Joseph Chaikin is an amazing, person to begin with. I talked in the interview about the letters that he wrote to Sam Shepard. That's a signpost work for any artist in any creative field. I think it's just a beautiful book to read and beautiful letters to read. he also, I mean, Ray talked about The Serpent, which was arguably one of the most famous plays that came out of the open theater, and how influential that was in the time. It was a kind of seismic thing that happened in this country as a result of that play. So Joseph Chaikin is one of those figurehead kind of theater people that clearly had a big impact on Ray. But to me, to have the insight to look at that person that had another breakdown, and to see the potential behind that breakdown is really just remarkable, you know. And I think Ray was clearly, I think the open theater benefited from Ray being a part of it. But on the flip side, what a gift to Ray to have a guy like Joseph Chaikin say, I would like you to come work with us.
Yeah, he was able to see into the trauma and see how it wasn't a liability and it could be used. You know, when I tell people who come with trauma, I say I'm not a psychologist. I'm not here to do that because I'm not trained to do that. But that stuff can be transmuted and used to put into material.
Yes.
You know, some of those, what we think are the biggest problems in our life, I say could be your gold.
Yes.
You know, it can be used that way. And Chaikin saw that. So you had Ray go from, you know, Yale, you know, training to McCarter Theater, very wordy stuff, break down, lose it, get into art, and then be pulled back in by Joseph Chaikin, which was very nonverbal. His theater was very movement orientated and not very many words.
I don't believe his role. He talked about playing Cain and having that experience of Cain murdering his brother. And he was talking about, at the moment, Cain, there was no murder. Nobody knew what the concept of murder and what the reality of murder was, but it was a wordless scene. Yeah. And so to hear Ray talk about that and how to express oneself without words and to tell a story like that without words, I thought was really, really remarkable.
So he went from there and that experience and then built himself up as an actor and then started working outside of the open theater and working on quote unquote, you know, straight plays, as they used to call them, like regular plays.
And really ended up doing, I think he said, like 30 something plays. So he definitely had a lot of plays and a lot of theater experience under his belt before he ever delved into film and television.
Yes. And so at a late, I
think he said he was 44.
Wow. Here comes Michael Cimino.
He did his first film. The movie, Michael Cimino is known for a lot of Deer Hunter, Heaven's Gate, which is arguably one of the biggest flops in Hollywood of all time, but still significant. But then, of course, a really, really good movie with Mickey Rourke called Year of the Dragon. Excellent movie. And Ray had a big role in it. But Ray was talking about the audition process for that. And it was we've talked about this before, that, you know, it's important to have something else to do as an actor, to not be so singularly focused on it that's the being and end all of your existence to get the role. And Ray was talking about breaking concrete. He was working construction at the time. He was helping out a friend, and he was doing one of the hardest things in construction, which is breaking concrete. So here is sledgehammer, jackhammer, breaking up this concrete, dust and mud and sweat, and he, you know, dust on his boots. And he had this audition. He fucking had to go, and he went, and he was still in his work clothes, still dusty, still muddy, still sweaty, walking into this audition. And he said then he, you know, could barely speak in the audition, didn't really share much, did the work, got called back again, got called back a third time, finally booked this really kind of significant role, I think a cop role on the
I think it was
like a corrupt
his partner,
cop,
New York's partner.
Yeah. Great role for him, great opportunity for him. But then on the flip side of it, it was so funny because Michael Cimino said to him, lovingly said, you know, he said, I knew I was going to cast you the minute I laid eyes on you. And which I think is such a significant thing, again, for us to learn in terms of the casting experience and how strange and random it is, right? I mean, the fact that he knew the minute he walked in, it was like, that's my guy. But then Ray, of course, being Ray, he was like, then why the fuck did you ask me to audition 3 times for you? And my favorite thing was the answer to that. Michael Cimino's answer was, because I really liked you. I just thought that was just so freaking cool, you know? The whole idea that, like, here it is again. We get swept up like in the insecurity and the doubt of being called back 3 times for a role. I'm not giving them what I want. What do they want? Why isn't one enough? Why do I have to keep going back? And this is just a director that freaking liked the guy. Just wanted to have him around, wanted to know more about him. How interesting in that. What a lesson in that, you know? But he talked clearly how that movie and that experience, I think, set him up for the rest of his television, his prodigious film
that
and
was a
television career.
life-changing moment. And then, so that's in New York. And then shortly after, he moves to L.A.
That's right.
And the next significant director he worked with that he mentioned, there was tons that he's worked with, obviously, was Oliver Stone.
Yes, because I might be wrong, but I think, again, the ties that bind. Oliver Stone wrote the screenplay for Year of the Dragon. So there was a connection there. So then what happens is Oliver Stone has it in the back of his mind that he wants to involve Ray in another project that he's doing, obviously a ways down the road, but it was born on the 4th of July. Which is a great, I forget the name, the first name of the character in real life is Ray, but I forget, or Ron, I'm going to forget now, shit.
Could you look that up? Ron was the son's name.
Which one?
I think that was Tom Cruise's
right,
name.
that's what I'm talking about. The real, Born on the 4th of July is a real life story about a Vietnam vet who he signed up. He was a volunteer. He was gung ho to fight. He was a true, die hard patriot. Mm-hmm. He then suffered a spinal injury in Vietnam by being shot in the back.
It was Ron.
Ron. Okay, thank you. So here it is. I thought it was Ray. It was Ron. But the point is that Tom Cruise played the central character of that piece, and then Ray Berry was cast as Tom Cruise's father by Oliver Stone. Oliver Stone tapped him to play Tom Cruise's father. And very interesting character, a few really key pivotal scenes. The kind of keystone scene of the whole movie is when Tom Cruise's character comes back home for the first time after the VA hospital and the brutal stuff that he experienced there and the awful pain that he experienced there after coming back stateside. And then he's coming home for the first time. He's being welcomed back in his home by his parents, who have done some handicap preparation for the place. And one of his lines, supposedly Ray's lines, was, "I put rails on the stair, handlebars on the stairs for you, Ronnie. I put the handlebars in the bathroom for you, Ronnie." So it was a really interesting scene. But essentially what Ray was really talking about was that he had done a scene earlier, another one of his scenes, and Oliver Stone, for some reason, Ray didn't really have many lines in that particular scene, but Oliver Stone took him aside and basically brutalized him. He destroyed him. He said, "What the fuck was that, Ray? What were you doing? That was nothing. That was terrible." And he got into Ray's head and was really fucking with him. And of course, Ray was devastated by this. He was like, "Well, Oliver, you didn't give me any lines. I didn't really have much to work with." And he was like, "What the fuck does that mean?" And he was really, really pushing back hard on Ray, and got this Ray in this weird place of doubt and insecurity and kind of unraveling. And it was essentially, on the flip side, it was all manipulation. It was all reverse psychology, because it got Ray into a place of vulnerability for the scene where his son is coming home for the first time. And Ray said they did it multiple times from multiple angles, again and again and again. And Ray, he said he was like an open vessel. Everything, he was feeling everything. Everything that was just coming out of him. And he said it was effortless. It was all there. It was just pouring out of him. And he admitted on the backside of that he was saying it with love. There was never any kind of dismissal or any kind of disparagement of Oliver Stone. It was all honoring Oliver Stone, and the fact that manipulation, that kind of mind fucking, that kind of gaslighting was actually of a benefit to Ray. He said that he admitted that he could not have done what he did in that scene without Oliver Stone having done what he did before then. Obviously not the most ideal way to work. I don't really believe in it, but clearly it had a huge impact on Ray. And Ray gave props where props are due. He said, "I could not have gotten there on my own. I needed," and so he gave Oliver Stone all those props. And I just think it's important for us to remember that acting truly is a collaborative process. And paramount in film, particularly in that process, is the relationship between director and actor. And there's been some famous cases of some awful relationships between director and actor. I think overall, Oliver Stone's relationship with Ray was actually really lovely. It was just in that particular moment, he felt like he needed to say what he said to get Ray where he needed to go. And then at the back end of that, he said, Ray, you did a really great job. And Ray said Oliver Stone was not one to bullshit. He was not one to put kind of extra sauce on something that needed it. He was like, it was simple. He said, it was simply said. And he said, because it was simply said, I knew it was true. And I just thought that was just a really, really significant thing to talk about, that even through an adversarial encounter with the director, that ultimately on the end of the other side of that was beauty, was magic, was something that he got that was valuable, that he was able to use. I thought that was just really significant.
Yeah, everybody needs a good director. And I mean, that is one particular way of working, the Oliver Stone way, which, I'm not a fan of, but
nor am I.
But he appreciated it, and he got a great performance out of it.
That's right.
And
Ray clearly is not traumatized by it. He
Yeah.
considered it a gift. And I think as long as the receiver of that, takes it in a good way and finds the lemonade out of the lemons from that, then who am I to judge?
The one time in class when I was super deliberately manipulative was I had an actor with me who was working for me for a while, and he was kind of hitting a wall. I think it was because he was being lazy. And I just, internally I said, I'm going to get really mad at him. I'm just going to just rip him. And I did. And he left class. And I was like, that was one of the shittiest things I've ever done. He came back. I'm only telling this story because he did, you know what I mean? And he did say he appreciated it. It kind of lit a fire under his ass. But that way of work, I did not like myself after doing that because it was manipulative. And I was trying to, instead of just being kind of straight with him and just talking how I felt, I played some sort of game of getting super angry. And
I think we always have to qualify these things, right? I don't think it's appropriate to brutalize anybody under any circumstances, but I do think manipulative, even the word manipulative, takes on a negative connotation all the time, and rightly so, right? But there is good manipulation, right?
Yes, however, in class, when you get to know someone, you know their triggers, and I will deliberately, under the guise of play, not that I'm winking at them, but there is a little bit of
that's good manipulation,
hey,
right?
We're going there, and I'm going to bring up some stuff respectfully that I might know or know how you work to get the performance.
Yeah. And to circle back with Joseph Chaikin, one of the things that Ray Berry talked about is the idea that Joseph Chaikin, again, in a lot of wordless performances, the foundation of a lot of what Open Theater did not have. It was not a very verbose theater company, right? But he was he directed by asking questions. And he would ask thoughtful questions. And then Ray said he would ask provocative questions. And I thought, how beautiful is that for a director to ask questions that provoke, right? I mean, that is a form of manipulation as well, but it's a good manipulation, right? I think it can it can lead you to good things. Questions, tough questions, thoughtful questions, provocative questions can lead. We talk about asking why until you can't ask why anymore. These are important things. And I think to use that Socratic method of asking questions is a beautiful way to live, let alone as a director or an actor, but just as a person. I think to ask questions, I think, is a valuable thing to do.
I think this leads right to our next subject, which if you look at these three directors and the different ways they worked with Ray, was the beauty of caring. One of the reasons why he took the quote-unquote abuse from Oliver Stone was because he cares. And there's a real beauty to an actor who cares about storytelling and cares about their craft. And it kind of goes without saying, but
It does, but again, at the cornerstone of, you've talked about this before, underneath fear oftentimes is caring. The reason you are fearful, yes, you are fearful for a lot of reasons when you audition, right? You're fearful of fucking up. You're fearful of not doing a good job. But why? Like, let's start asking the questions why. Because you care. You care about your performance because you want to do a good job. You care because you want to honor the material. You care because you want to impress. You care because you care about the craft of acting. It is important to you. So fear is actually, it underlies care, and care is the proof of, excuse me, fear is the proof of caring, I think. And that's a beautiful way to be. I think when you're doing a project, this happens all the time. You and I have been in a number of plays that we knew in our heart of hearts were pieces of shit, right? But when you're in it, you can't feel that way. You can't be performing in the moment knowing that this is a piece of shit. You can't exude that. You have to commit heart and soul 100% to the given circumstances and to the moment. You have to believe that what you're doing is of paramount importance, even though, again, the reviews tell you after the fact that it was not worth doing and it was an absolute piece of shit. But in the moment, you have to believe, you must believe that it is an important story to tell. It needs telling, right?
That's the beauty of actors and the imagination and the power of belief. Is I've worked with a lot of people, and I would say, obviously without mentioning anything in particular, they're kind of subpar scripts and subpar projects. But when the actor commits their heart and soul to it, when they're in it, they really believe it is a great, brilliant piece of work. And I think there's real beauty in that. Once you commit to it, now you use that faculty beforehand, either to commit or not to commit to a project. But once you're in it, you care so much that the material, this very subpar material, becomes Shakespeare.
I think it kind of has to, It's almost a survival technique as well, but I think it's important. And it goes back, we were talking a little bit earlier about, again, you're going to help me with the name of the chairman of GM that said leadership. The leader is the person who cares the most.
Jack Welch.
Thank you.
Why do I know that? I do not have any idea.
I don't know either, but I'm so glad you do. So thank you for that. But I think, if the definition of a leader is someone who cares the most, I think you could also tweak it and say an actor is the profession in which someone cares the most, right? I think that is crucial. I think you have to. I think in order for the audience to care, you have to care, right? I think the degree in which you care and in which you invest in this given circumstance allows the audience to care, allows the audience to connect. I mean, if you're going through it and going through the motions and you can give a shit, audiences are smart. They're smarter than people give them credit for. They can read it. They know it. They know you're phoning it in, and they're not interested.
Because let's face it, on set, you're the one who cares the most, because all the surrounding people are just interested in when's lunch and not really listening.
In all due fairness, they're focused on their job.
Of course.
A grip is not focused on your
job.
acting performance. The grip is trying to make sure that the camera and the lights and everything is where the technical aspects of what's happening to capture what you're doing is all good, right? The cinematographer is not interested necessarily in your acting performance. They're interested in the lighting, in the shading, in the composition of the shot. They're trying to serve the director, right? Even the director sometimes is not as concerned probably as they should be in what the actor is doing. They have a lot of other fish to fry. They have 1,000 questions being asked of them. They are thinking of the big picture. The last thing they have time to do is to necessarily care about the details and the minutia of your acting performance. That's why you need to care the most. You need to care about your process. You need to care about your prep, and you need to care about what you are bringing to the process, right? Because nobody else is going to care as much about it. You, by definition, you need to care the most about what you're doing.
Well, we'll leave it at that.
Boom.
Take care, Tommy.